Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Jane Cahill Wolfgram, the Synod Vice President. We're really excited that you are all willing to spend your evening with us and looking at and discussing the Synod budget and compensation plan. I'd like to open tonight with a prayer from Reverend Steve Kotke, and then we will come back for some instructions and talk about how the night's going to go. So also, would everyone mute that isn't speaking?
What did they do now?
Would you say that again?
Would anyone who isn't speaking please mute? Thank you.
Gotta get back to the picture.
Steve?
Okay, let us pray. Good evening, Lord. We thank you for the gift of yet this day. We ask for a restful night and awaken to another day in your glorious creation. As we gather tonight, as we rapidly approach our Synod Assembly, we'll be discussing two different pieces of documents that will be voted on there. We ask that tonight, our conversation and deliberations be guided by your Spirit.
We lost his video.
At this assembly. Whatever you see that any of us may need, we ask that you would grant. In the name of your Son, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, just a few things. What we plan to do tonight is to go through the budget spending, or the spending plan with you for fiscal year 21-22 and the compensation guidelines, and then enter into a question and answer period. It is our hope that while we do this, you'll all stay on mute, except when you are going to ask a question, and we will call on you. We're also hoping that you all are okay with the fact that we're recording it, so that if other people want to watch this at another time, if they're not able to be with us tonight, they're able to do that. And then finally, we're asking that if you could, there's a raise hand feature under participant options on the bottom of your screen. And if you want to ask a question, and you can find the raised hand option, we'd ask that you use that. Otherwise, if you raise your hand to get our attention, Robin and I will watch for you, or put in the chat room your desire to ask a question or your question, and we will try to get to them. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Bruce Hutler, who is the treasurer of the Synod, and ask him to begin taking us through the spending plan. Bruce?
Thank you, Jane. Once again, Bruce Hutler, 10th year of being the Synod treasurer. So thanks for your attention this evening. I don't think we're scheduled through 8:30. I don't believe we'll maybe take that long, but if we'll slide through these through the spending plan and the guidelines, and again take any questions as they come up. And so I just have a couple slides on the spending plan, similar to if we're assembled in person. Just I'll highlight some of the key components of the spending plan, and then also Steve will take us through the compensation guidelines, and then once we go through a couple slides here, I'll actually bring up the spending plan on my screen, and we'll go a little bit more line by line. But these are just the highlights over these last couple slides. So again, this is the spending plan from February 1st, 2021 through January 30th, 2022. And so obviously the Synod's going to go through some great change here over the next months. And so, there's a lot of uncertainty as to, what we'll see as a Synod both in mission support and our expense structure with the Synod staff and a newly elected bishop and so forth. And so obviously there's a fair amount of guesswork involved here, but using historical information as a guide, we've put together the finance committee and then the Synod council, put forth a suggested spending plan as we see fit or as best we can with the information available to us. And so this will be voted upon when we're together remotely here on the 29th, but hopefully this will maybe we'll be able to solicit some questions and be able to do that a little more efficiently once we assemble on the 29th. So the spending plan is essentially a break-even plan rather than just getting to zero. We've got a small deficit of $91, but essentially it's break-even. Just a note that any additions to the spending plan would require us to use funds from our restricted funds, and so we've had our last assembly, we did have a rule that anything that was suggested additional to the spending plan, there would also need to be a recommendation as to where the funding would come from. So as that as a backdrop, we do have mission support we're budgeting our mission support at 1.3 million. This is looking at the historical mission support, year-to-date mission support, and conversations throughout the Synod, as I mentioned there. And so again, we're frankly on track for a little bit more than 1.3 right now, but we're only 5 months in, and so we've got a ways to go to see where we're going to be, where we're going to end up. In years past, we do provide, so one thing that I'm not sure how many participants tonight have been to an assembly before or understand kind of our Synod finances 101, if you will. But for typically there's about a third of you that are new to the proceedings. So of every dollar that we receive as the South Central Synod of Wisconsin, as part of the larger church and 3 expressions of the church, we pass along 47% of every dollar we receive to churchwide. And so this spending plan for 2021 through 2022 continues that 47%. In some years past, we've had to adjust that accordingly, but this year we're not suggesting anything different. So the 47% of every dollar would go out down churchwide, and then 6.2 cents of every dollar goes on to seminaries and Lutheran campus ministry. And so essentially we have 40.6 cents of every dollar to use for our operations of the Synod. And so, and obviously I encourage you to go onto the ELCA churchwide website. There's a couple of great videos that talk about how those funds that we pass along are used. And Vicki might even, just to highlight, I think Jane might mention it at the end, but I do think Vicki will be sending out a narrative spending plan later this week, and maybe with that she'll put a link to a couple of those videos that are really helpful. So we've got, after passing along to churchwide and seminaries and Lutheran campus ministry, we do have about $15,000 of intentional benevolence as well. And we'll get into a little detail on that in a moment. And that's continued from past years, and I'll explain that in a moment. And a little bit of other income. And then the last slide here, before we get into the Excel spreadsheet, personnel expenses, as like in your own congregations, personnel expenses are obviously the largest portion of our spending plan. In the terms of the Synod, that's about $400,000. We've estimated here, consistent with the compensation guidelines for 2021, a 1.6% increase, and that's tied to the cost of living increase, the COLA, for this past year. And then the step increase for the experience. So all the rostered staff would get their experience step increase plus the COLA increase. The non-rostered staff would get that COLA increase. And then obviously portico increases, I believe that just came out in the last week or so, about 3.5% if I recall correctly. But an important point on personnel expenses, and you know, we're estimating roughly like $390,000 on this, but this is probably, you know, mission support is the biggest guess, and personnel expenses are the biggest guess, because we don't, you know, we have 4 great candidates for bishop. We don't know exactly, you know, which one would be elected. We're not sure of, you know, depending on their age, their family situation, and so forth. The health benefits are going to be different. Their experience level is going to be different, and so, you know, that personnel expenses is a bit of a guess at this point. And quite honestly, the Synod office structure could be a little different. And so those are, but historically we've run into that. We ran roughly in that $375,000 to $400,000 range. So that's how that's coming from. And some other personnel expenses, we'll see that in a moment. Travel and things of that nature are consistent year to year. Leadership support are consistent. For the rostered staff here are familiar with the ASSIST program, which is a kind of self-help for our rostered folks that need, there and their families that maybe need some help. That's a large $6,000 expenditure every year. Leaders education, you know, so then the rest of these are pretty much consistent with past or prior years, and so we'll see that when I get the Excel slide. At leaders education, youth ministry, committees, no other material changes to the other categories. And then obviously the office is the other point on here, and I don't have a separate point on the slide, but consistent, roughly about $100,000 there too. The biggest 2 components there, as we'll see, is rent and our audit fees and our bookkeeping fees. And so there's not too much flexibility in those either. So bear with me as I switch gears here. So this is, I've tried to increase the size of this, and so hopefully folks can see this. So this is the Excel spreadsheet that I was mentioned before. And so again, for those of you who don't like looking at numbers, I'll try to keep this fairly high level and explain fairly well. But what we have here is 5 different columns, and we have the actual for our fiscal year through June 30th, 2018. And for those of you that's been around the Synod for a little while, we did have a June 30th fiscal date. Our year historically ended at the end of June. In order to get in line with the rest of the synods around churchwide, we had to move our fiscal year-end date to January 31st. And so we did that during 2019. We had a 7-month period, or 7-month kind of stub year, I call it, through January 31st, 2019. And then January 31st, 2020 was our first full 12-month fiscal year using the January 31st date. And so we've got actuals for those three years. And then in column T here, we have the approved budget that the Synod Assembly approved for the current year that we're living through, February 1st, 2020 through January 31st, 2021. And so then the proposed budget is in column V here. And you know, so I know some folks that are new to the Synod, it's like, well, how are we passing a budget that doesn't even begin until next February? Well, that's the situation we're in with our assembly timing, and frankly, we're usually doing this in late April or early May, and so we're actually a little closer to that date than we typically are. So you can see mission support here. I alluded to that earlier. We've got 1.3 million. That's the same amount of mission support we projected for the prior year, 1.3. The year before that at 1.4. And as I mentioned, we're probably through June. We're actually trending closer to the 1.4 right now, but again, we have we have 7 months to go. And so with everything we're living through here, is, just uncertain. And so I think a more prudent way to go about it is to continue our $1.3 million mission support estimate. And then obviously we would, if the Synod were to end the year in a surplus, which hasn't happened for quite a while, I'll show that to you in a moment. But I think the idea would be that the Synod Council would maybe make some adjustments there, decide how to use those funds. Not a problem that we've had in recent times. So then we start with a 1.3. As I mentioned, 47% of that goes on to churchwide. Not sure what that is there. Then seminaries, 6.2%, and Lutheran Campus Ministry, 6.2%. And so we're left with net available for operations of $527,000, and $527,800. So again, that 40.6 cents of every dollar is available for our budget, so to speak, or our spending plan. A little bit of other income that we estimate, undesignated contributions. These are contributions from individuals that come to the Synod. Historically, that was about 8,500 in the prior years. Oftentimes, that's the bishop or sometimes the Synod staff. Sometimes it just is a little bit of a guess at this point. No grant revenue that's coming through the operating budget, registration fees. That's a good point. Our assembly, lead, bishop convocation, those things are not in the operational budget. Those are historically have been break-even type of situations that we've accounted for kind of off the operating budget because they've historically been self-supporting, and so those type of items are not in this spending plan. And so then we've got there's a little bit of rent income here, interest income, and so again we're about at $543,000 of income to spend, if you will. And then other ministry partners. These are some other benevolence dollars that are spent that are not tied to a percentage of income. And so again, these were 47, 6.2, 6.2 of income, but these are actual dollar amounts, somewhat similar to what your congregation might have for a benevolence in their spending plan. So required expenditure is Region 5. Typically when we're together, I'll talk a little bit about how we are situated in churchwide and within different regions of churchwide, and so the synods are organized into different regions. We're in Region 5, and so each one of those regions has some expenses to cover, and so we have Region 5 expenses of $7,100, consistent with prior years. Lutheran Outdoor Ministries, LOPPW, Lutheran Planned Giving, which is a required, that's kind of an agreement with some of the other Wisconsin synods. We jointly support that, and then Wisconsin Council for Churches. So another roughly $15,000 of benevolence there out of our expenses there. And then we get down to personnel. And so this is what I mentioned before. Again, obviously the biggest chunk of our spending is in personnel. And again, I've got, let's just use round numbers here tonight, $390,000. The spending plan for this past year, or what year actually we're going through right now, was just under $400,000. Prior year, $371. This was, this column P was just 7 months, remember, and so those are why those numbers are smaller. $366. And so it's really a guess as to the experience level of whom we elect and so forth. Right now we're actually a little bit below our personnel budget because the situation with the bishop and how we're compensating Peter and so forth, and versus how Vivian's situation and Portico and so forth. And so we're actually doing pretty well on personnel expenses this year so far. And then just a few other things under personnel. We include travel, mileage and meals and lodging under that. Consistent with last year's spending plan, but a little bit maybe lower than past years. That travel in column R here, that travel for 2020, I think we had a little bit of expense put a little there that maybe should have been put somewhere else. But in any event, we're pretty comfortable with that travel expense there. And so $409,000, $410,000 for personnel. And again, we're subtracting off the 452. And so if you do that math, there's not a whole lot left after that. And just I'll skip ahead here. I'll come back to these lines here, but as you can see, we did have a operating income surplus in 2018 of $16,000, but then our seven month period for 2019, a $45,000 loss. Last year was $12,000 loss, and so luckily we had the resources to be able to withstand those losses, but certainly not something we can sustain. And so we had budgeted about a $2,000 income, if you will, for this current year. We're through 5 months. We're actually exceeding that a little bit, and then a little bit of loss here in our forecast. And I highlight that because if we take off from this $542,000, we take off $409,000 of personnel, and then we'll go into detail here, but $100,000 of office expense. There's not a whole lot of discretionary funds to debate about, frankly. And so we'll go through, just I gotta highlight that for some background as we go through the last few categories here. So leadership support, consistent with last year, we've got staff continuing education, WCC annual meeting fee, and then the assist program, which again is for any new laity folks to the conversation, is for our rostered folks and what I consider required expenditure. And so $10,000 for under leadership support, professional leaders in education, cost for first call for theoretical education, so $1,000. That's pretty much a required. We need to have that in our budget. And our program expenses, youth ministry, $1,000, and then also for RIC, LGBTQIA Synod Task Force, which Jason leads. He had requested $2,500, and we were supporting that through our current operating budget. And I think Jane will highlight a little bit later. We did have a question prior to our session here about the racial equity team and so forth. You won't see them in a line item here in our operational budget for this year, because they actually do have some dedicated restricted funds that they have, $3,500. That's $3,500 that they have available to them out of the restricted funds part of our savings. And so the reason why this group here, they did not have access to those funds, and so we do have them as part of the operating budget here today. Candidacy, $1,500, similar to last year, kind of more or less a expense we need to include in our operating budget. Communication, we moved this to office, and so that's why in 2018 those were broken out, but they're zeroed out the rest of the year because they're buried into this next category of office. And so these are things you'd see in your congregation, hospitality expenses, and again, these are all pretty much consistent with prior years. Hospitality, postage and delivery, office supplies, resource materials, leasing some of our office equipment, accounting and audit. Our audit costs roughly $6,000-7,000 a year. Our bookkeeping, we contract our bookkeeping out to Becky, who many of you know does a fabulous job, makes my job so much more easy because she's so on top of things. And so a shout out to Becky for all her hard work. And we honestly don't pay her enough for everything she does. And so that she's part of that cost as well. Becky Johnson is her name. And then our rent, which is obviously a fixed cost, and that escalates a little bit every year. And for those of you who've been to our Odana Road office, so that's the cost for that. Again, you know, we did, if you look back historically, we did actually cut that back quite a bit from where we used to be, given our new location, or since we moved to our different location. The telephone expenses, insurance, technology and support, $10,000. This is that last item. A bit of a guess as well. Some of this includes our well, a website. In some years, some of the fees to register for certain events. We're maybe revisiting some of that here going forward, but $10,000 for all that technology. And so that's the office of $102,000. And then the last three things here, and it's approaching 7:30, so I wanted to kind of keep this to a half hour. My portion here anyway is, you'll see special events, 0, election task force, 0, installation costs, vehicle replacement fund, and reserve fund are all 0. And so these are expenses that we will or have had in the past that, you know, we just don't have room in the budget for, frankly. And so the installation costs, you know, hopefully we're able to do that through in-kind and so forth. And so that is not budgeted in here, which we will have an installation, although from talking at the City Council here over the weekend, that might be delayed a little bit with our current situation of not being able to assemble in large groups. Vehicle replacement fund, we do have a vehicle for the bishop. We don't lease. We did buy that several years ago. It was more economical given the mileage situation. We don't have a replacement fund there, and so that's obviously something we'll have to replace at some point in time. And then just reserve fund. You know, we're not really putting anything away for a rainy day, if you will. And so you can see how we're spending the $540-some thousand, and we're left with $91, you know, negative $91. And so again, I hopefully didn't confuse too many people, but just wanted to kind of give you some color commentary on where these funds go and how we use them, and really kind of our limited flexibility with what we have, given some of our fixed expenses of staff, rent, and so forth. So with that, I will pause, and I think Jane is going to quarterback our questions this evening. I'll handle those questions, and I don't know, Jane, I know if we're going to go through any of the questions before Steve goes into the compensation guidelines, or if we're going to do them all at the end.
It might be easier to do the budget questions first.
That makes sense to me.
So, Robin, do you want to, do we want the slide down while and bring people up for the questions and answers?
Yes, yeah. There, now you're up.
All right. So we will ask again, if you can, raise your hand using the participant option if you have a question, and Robin and I will try and spot you.
Okay, it looks like we have one already too.
Okay, you want to bring it
So,
up?
yeah, if you want to unmute and put your camera on. Oh, maybe they brought their hand down now.
Okay.
Yep.
Let me start then with the question from Karen Hansen. Bruce covered part of it, but Karen from All Saints in Fitchburg asked the following: in light of the racial issues that we are currently having in our country, how does the budget reflect support for specific Black, Latino, and other minority initiatives? And then secondly, what amount of money is specifically allocated to each of these? The Bruce addressed the Racial Equity Task Force, which has $3,500. And we also, over the weekend, the council in their meeting approved $8,000 a year for the next 3 years to match some dollars that our ministry partners are giving to Latino ministry, and some grant dollars that we currently have and hope to secure additional churchwide dollars to support, to really emphasize and work on our Latino ministries. Specifically, this money over the weekend was approved for Santa Maria, and we are also working on looking at strategies for San Jose. We also recognize a growing Latino population around our synod, particularly in some of our rural areas. And we are looking at putting a task force together and using, frankly, some of the Santa Maria folks and San Jose folks to help us look for ways to involve other churches in addressing some of that population. So I hope that answers your questions. Again, $3,500 for the Racial Equity Task Force and $8,000 a year for 3 years for Santa Maria.
Jane, it looks like we have a question from John. John, if you want to unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious to know how our contribution to churchwide compares to other synods, if that's a set amount or if we decided kind of what our percentage was going to be ourselves. Thank you.
Bruce?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I apologize for not covering that a little bit more. It's determined ourselves. It's determined by our assembly. When I started as Synod Treasurer 10 years ago, we were at 55 cents or 55%. We've steadily gone down. Last assembly, we did go down to 47%. Frankly, just the finances of the Synod dictated that to be able to. We just couldn't sustain ourselves at the level we were at anything above that. But to answer your question, as far as average, it's because of the COVID situation, they're not reporting this as quickly as they used to. And so I don't have the statistics in front of me right now, but historically 55% was higher. I would say a lot of Region 5, all the synods together, I think are probably lower than 47%. I would essentially guarantee that. Region 5 has historically been a pretty strong percentage giver, if you will. And so I would say historically the Region 5 has been close to the 50%, but there's been a few synods within the region that have got gone below that in recent years. And so I would say we're pretty close to right on average of Region 5 and probably a little bit above on churchwide, just because there's a few outliers there that kind of skew the average. But we'd certainly like to be higher. I think Milwaukee might be the only synod that's over anywhere close to 55 anymore. But I apologize, I don't have those in front of me. Maybe at the assembly I'll highlight that, but hopefully that gives you a little color.
Jane? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Jane, there's a question by EJ McGuire.
Okay. Do you want to unmute yourself?
He doesn't have a camera on, so it looks like he's just going to ask the question.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Am my mic
Yes.
open?
We
Oh,
can.
okay. All right, I was just curious about the campus ministry. If I recall, it was $80,000. And is that just for the campus ministry at the university in Madison, or does that include other schools?
Yeah, that's historically that's been Madison, Whitewater, and Platteville. And I'm not sure if there's anybody on the call tonight that are part of that task force. Maybe Carolyn's on, but because of the certain campuses haven't been as active. Actually, yeah, well, certain campuses haven't been as active, or there hasn't been an active role, I think, particularly at maybe Whitewater. And so the allocation of those funds has maybe been a little different in recent times, just because of, if they're not active, they don't need those funds. But historically, it has been for those 3 campuses. I'm not sure if Naomi or Carolyn are on to be able to add some light to that.
There is a full-time Madison campus pastor. My phone is ringing. Is the bulk of that go to Madison?
Bruce, I can speak to that.
Sure.
As I recall, I think the percentages are 80% for Madison, and 10% for each of the other 2. But nothing is being sent to Whitewater right now because they don't have anybody there. It's being it's being set aside in the funds for such time as a decision is made, if there is going to be someone, and if not, then those funds will be available in some fashion for other campus ministry.
Okay.
Steve, I didn't hear you because that phone was ringing. Did you say 90% was for Madison?
80%. 80%. And gifts that come in, if they come in just generally for campus ministry, it's that same percentage. If gifts come in earmarked for a particular campus ministry, then they all go to that particular one.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, now I think we have EJ
We
McGuire.
have another question.
Are you there, EJ McGuire? No, guess not.
Okay.
Let's see.
Are there other budget questions?
There's one in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
How many people are covered?
Mhm.
Yeah, I can take that one. So to answer the question, there's 3 people. The bishop, bishop's assistant, and I apologize, Vicki, what your formal title is right now, but essentially, communications manager for the synod. And so those 3 people are covered with Portico, and executive assistant is not at this point in time.
And there are 4 staff though, right?
Correct. And then Walter's position is funded through Churchwide. And so he is paid and his benefits are directly through Churchwide.
And then there's Robin, who is the administrative assistant. So.
Correct. We have the bishop, Peter, Steve and Walter, Vicki, and Robin.
Yeah. Okay. We get a lot done with very few people. They work hard.
Yeah, I think Peter has when he joined, when Mr. Rognes came to us, he was surprised what we get done with the amount of staff we have.
And in part, it's not only our staff are good and they work very hard, but the team of volunteers and rostered leaders and laity that work with the synod allow us to carry out the ministry that we do. So building those teams is very important.
Yeah, exactly. And now, Jason helping with the website and yeah, there's just countless and with youth, various folks, and just countless hours of volunteer effort on everybody's part to make that work.
We have a question from Peter in the chat room. Can you give us some idea of the size of the reserves? And I think there's the reserves, I assume they're meaning the dollars from the sale of properties, and then we have restricted funds, which aren't reserves. So Bruce, do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. I was pulling up a spreadsheet here so I can handle that question a little bit better. The majority of our reserves are restricted, designated to various situations, and so if I look at our restricted funds, about $180,000 of savings, if you will, are restricted to certain types of uses, and so for example, continuing ed, campus ministry, companion synod funds, and there are all, while we do have those funds available, they're all essentially dedicated to a specific use, and frankly, the amount that is not designated is only about $50,000, and so when just going to my balance sheet here, and obviously we have an endowment fund too, but that's restricted from, we can only spend a certain percentage of that every year, roughly about $10,000 to $12,000 each year, and then those funds are invested in money market fund and some CDs and so forth, because we do need relatively liquid access to those. But where I was going with this, two things is, when we talk about, using some of those funds, we certainly we don't want to be sitting on a whole lot of money. But on the other hand, historically, we have run at a deficit. And because of those dedicated funds that we didn't need to spend at a particular point in time or today, we were able to cover those. And so we're essentially maybe borrowing it from ourselves to cover operations, which obviously isn't a situation we want to be in. And it was frankly one of the reasons we had to decrease our church-wide giving to 47%, because we just couldn't sustain that. Because there was a time not so long ago that if we needed to send all that money to the various dedicated sources, we wouldn't have been able to keep our lights on, so to speak. And so that's why we'd like to build up our reserves a bit beyond just those undesignated reserves, if you will, to be able to do things. We did apply for and receive the PPP funds from the SBA this year, and that's about $74,000, and so that's helped. I'm not including those numbers in what I just shared with you, and so that was able to help us through a bit of our liquidity issues as well.
I wasn't looking to see how we could spend it, but just to have a rough idea of background as to what kind of reserves we have.
Yeah, no, fair question, and well taken. Certainly, so an important thing that we certainly talk about at our finance committee.
And the other question that we had before was what happened with the funds from the sale of Poinet, and do you want to address that at all, Bruce, with maybe Poinet and Albany?
Yeah, Albany, we those funds are, not sure I have that right in front of me, but those funds are available, and we've not spent those funds. Jane, do you recall that amount right now? Again, I don't.
There was about $67,000 from Albany, 47 in assets and 20,000 from the sale of building. And when we sold Bethel Poinet, I think that was total with the parsonage of around 200, 220.
Yeah, and then we had some expenses against, we have that expenses against Poinet, and so roughly about 90 was left from the Poinet situation, because Poinet actually, when I had the Excel spreadsheet up and we had that $45,000 loss and $12,000 loss, quite honestly, without Poinet happening, with Bethel Poinet dissolving and Synod receiving those funds, I'm not sure where we would have been, frankly. That was a blessing. Yeah, we still have funds. We want to. Those funds are not, certainly don't want to have the legacy of that just covering our operations. We do have a clear, I guess what's like word I'm looking for, I guess a clear path to wanting to use those funds in a way that will help us to fulfill their endowment or their legacy, if you will, that an ongoing type of use for those, that we can say that, hey, that because of Poignant, we were able to do this. And so again, there's still funds available from that sale that we will be able to use.
And indeed, it's some of those funds we're putting towards Latino ministry.
Yes, and Albany. Yep.
Other questions?
I do see one question here in the chat. The balance sheet. There is a balance sheet on in the Synod in the assembly materials. I don't have that with me at the moment. I'm not sure what page they were on, but maybe when Vicki sends out the kind of back or the follow up to this webinar, maybe we can just highlight that. But the financials through May, no, might be April or May are in the assembly materials, and the balance sheet is in there.
Your report and the numbers are on page 102, starting there.
Thank you, Robin.
Mhm.
All right. Are there other questions, or do we want to move on to the compensation plan?
Yes, I have a question. Dale Sorensen. The bishop's time here has been altered. He was here till the end of July originally. How long might his time here be extended?
He has agreed to stay with us until we have elected a new bishop and that person is starts. So October 1 is what we're looking at. If we are electing August 29th, the new bishop would start October 1. He has been very generous with his time. He originally said he'd work 3/4 time. He's worked more than full time. He has been just a real blessing. He's also been very generous with how he came to us, and because of our financial situation last year, we were able to pay him 3/4 time and then add the rest of the dollars to his salary this year. So it has been a real blessing. I don't know, we could have afforded a full-time bishop unless we had had the generosity of Peter Rockness.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Okay. With that, then, why don't we get Steve and Bruce to take us through the compensation plan for the coming year?
Yeah, let me actually, I'm sorry, Robin. You don't have to move, you don't have to change cameras here, but I think I did miss one question. Has COVID-19 decreased expenses, been neutral? It's decreased expenses because less hospitality expenses, less office expenses. And so we have spent less, obviously, lead assembly and so those type of things. But those are kind of off our operating plan, but our spending plan. But frankly, on the giving, as I said, we're tracking through June. We're $7,000 less than where we were last year for mission support, which I think is just phenomenal. And so it hasn't impacted us as much as I thought or would have thought. And so our giving is not off too far. Mission support, I mean, and our expenses are actually a little bit lower because we're spending a little less. And I will take this moment to highlight too, and maybe it's a good segue question, this COVID question, that as you know, in some of the materials Vicki's released, we only are charging $25 for the assembly, and it's costing us more like $75 a person. And so I meant to go back to it on this when I had the Excel spreadsheet up, but so we are essentially as a synod covering $10,000 of expenses that we typically pass through to the attendees, and so we asked for some additional, maybe to the extent folks could spend a little bit more than the $25 per person, but I'm not making this plea right now for that. What I'm saying is that that's one, given our reserves and so forth. Well, I don't like to use the reserves because I've been accused of misleading folks on that, but with our restricted funds, that $10,000 is going to be used of that funds to help cover this assembly, just because of the cost is, we went from a live to a remote to a multi-site assembly to now a fully remote assembly, which, while you might think is cheaper, is actually more costly because of all the technology that has to go behind that. And so I will say that if to support your synod, if you do have ability to help, you can certainly use the help, but that's another $10,000 that's not in this operational budget that's going to be hit our spending plan this year. And with that, I'll move it over to Steve.
Thank
Okay,
you,
thanks,
Bruce.
thanks, Bruce. I'll talk, Bruce. I'll talk about the salary and the housing, but since you actually crunch those numbers, if I misspeak, then jump in. But historically, what we do for the salary portion is look at what the Social Security Administration advises for COLA adjustment for the year. And we look at the entry level first call base salary compensation, apply the COLA, and then the $786 for each step of experience, as Bruce was talking about when he first started his portion of this. So each year it's that same process, the COLA adjustment, and then on the base level, and then the 786 for each year of experience as you move up the scale. Housing is a rolling 3-year calculation, updated annually for each county. And as part of that those rolling numbers, there's a low, a high, and an average housing amount for each county, each of our 13 counties that are part of our South Central Synod of Wisconsin. And that's how that portion of it is put together. Another change that's in there this year is the formula when a congregation owns a parsonage. And that change is to reflect what apparently is a different way that Portico is calculating that. And it's, I talked to 2 different people at Portico to confirm that this is how they're calculating. So we'll always be very close when we calculate the numbers for a new pastor coming in. It'll be very close, but the final numbers are always subject to whatever Portico receives. And then these have always been intended as guideline minimum numbers. And in the introduction this time, we actually made sure that language was in there, so it's clear to everyone, we hope. So with that, I'll entertain questions.
May I ask, and I believe it did, there is a copy of the compensation guidelines in the packet in the book for the assembly. It's also available on the website.
Actually, in the packet, it's just the link to the website.
Okay.
Because the
All
whole
right,
thing's
thank
not
you.
printed there.
Okay. So I don't know if everyone has accessed it yet, but it is there if you want to see it. Are there questions regarding the compensation guidelines for either Bruce or Steve?
I see one in the chat asking if the step increase has been applied to the if the COLA is applied to the step increase each year as well. And some years back, I don't remember when that was, it had been, But as we talked about it, we didn't think that that was right. And so it is no longer, the COLA is no longer applied to the step.
Yeah, and it hasn't been for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, it's been quite a while back.
Yeah.
And so the COLA is only applied to that base level first call compensation, and then the steps are applied after that.
And we verified that with a couple other synods as well, and
Yeah.
that's what they were doing as well.
Yeah.
They weren't applying the COLA to the step.
Right.
Rich McClear has a question in chat. Will we ever have an option to choose a different provider from Portico like Bethel Clergy have or still do?
That's certainly always an option, but I think you want to be really, really careful that you're actually comparing apples to apples with whatever it is. You know, and I've helped several congregations as they're exploring those, you know, that particular option. And oftentimes they're only looking at the health portion of it. With Portico, there's also disability, long-term disability coverage. There's also the $50,000 group life that's part of it, and you know, some of those things would need to be added to the mix. So you're looking at apples to apples comparison. This year, Portico has announced that they're looking at as Bruce mentioned, a 3.5% increase, but they're also restructuring the options available. I've not seen what those look like yet, but I think there's only going to be two options, and they're trying to structure them more in line with what people are expecting when they do select their coverage.
Okay. There's a question from Dan Feaster. What percentage of clergy are at guidelines and above or below guidelines?
Based on some numbers that Peter shared with me following pastors submitting their report to the bishop, if I remember correctly, it was about 10% reporting were below. The rest were either at or above the compensation guidelines.
There's a question from Vicki. She said, I received a question today from someone who asked whether COLA will ever be applied to pulpit supply.
That's something that we can talk about. It likely wouldn't be COLA. It would likely simply be a change in the dollar amount structure.
Yeah, it's been some number of years since we increased that, but we have increased it.
Yeah.
I have to go back and see when it, but we typically do that on like $5, $10 increments, or some, rather than just $1 or $2. We just kind of do that in increments. But it's been some time since we've addressed it, and I would presume that maybe with a newly elected bishop, we maybe do a bigger deeper dive into this coming year.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
I was asked, switching gears from Steve for a moment. I'm just looking in the chat from Robin. What is LOPPW? Where does rent come from? It's Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin. That's Cindy Crane. She does rent a single office from us, and so that's a portion of that.
This is Peter Heidi, retired.
Peter?
I have a couple of things that I'd like to have explained. Can you tell me why, at least as I read it, that rostered people in the office have a 2.8 bump, and that that the rest of the rostered people are getting a 1.6 COLA increase? Did I read that correctly?
Yeah, that's a little misleading. My fault. So that percentage, it's the rostered looks like they're getting a bigger, well, they are actually physically, or actually getting a bigger percentage because of the step increase. And so the 2.5 2.6% increase, whatever it was the step increase plus the COLA increase. And so on average, the rostered staff was getting a 2.56% increase. But the non-rostered staff do not get that step increase. They've historically just received the COLA increase.
Okay. And then when I looked at the housing allowance that for the different counties, it said monthly amount, and I think that what we meant to put was yearly.
Yeah, that's supposed to be annual housing allowance.
Yeah, and it said monthly,
Okay.
which looked really good.
Yeah, I bet it
Yeah,
did.
yeah, I'll bet that did.
Right.
Yeah. And then I forgot what the other one was. Anyway, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, on the budget or compensation plans? Okay. It has been an interesting year, and I think we have done well as a team, partners in ministry with our congregations and with Churchwide to address a very unusual year with and still carry out our ministry. Folks working from home, folks not traveling to be together, learning how to operate and do meetings on Zoom. Just lots and lots of challenges, and yet we've been able to do some really strong ministry. So hopefully, as we continue moving forward in these unusual times, we'll continue to find strategies to increase ministry. And we'll be able to find a way to build stronger ministry partners together. I have just learned a tremendous amount this year and appreciate so much the work of our treasurer and all he's done to keep us afloat and deal with our needs and help us figure out strategies to make everything work. And Steve as well has worked very hard to help supply pastors to help us keep things afloat in the office and work through some very difficult transitions. So thank you both for that. If folks have questions about the budget, or the compensation plan, you can still send them to us, email them to either Bruce or Steve or I, and we'll try to make sure you get answers. We will send out the narrative budget, which frankly will be a little easier to work with your councils and to work with your congregations to talk about mission support, and it outlines much more clearly what some of the ministry areas are and where the dollars go when they go to Churchwide and how they come back to us. So hopefully it'll be a tool that we can all use to discuss the budget in a more explanatory way for our congregations. That will be available to you very soon. Needs a little review, and then we will be sending it out to you. So with that, I'll ask Bruce or Steve if they want to make any other comments.
No, I'm good.
I would just appreciate the kind words, Jane, but I just thank everybody for all the congregations for their mission support and keeping us strong and even pretty close to last year, and then just everybody's help, Synod staff, Becky, and just my job's pretty easy based on all the efforts on everybody else. So I'll defer all the credit to others. Thank you.
Well, and thank you all for your interest and for joining us tonight. I'm glad that close to 100 people were here for most of the conversation and the good questions that came up. So thanks for being here.
Yes, and I echo that. Thank you for for joining us and showing your interest and support. It's a pleasure to be able to work with all of you and serve together. We'll look forward to seeing you at our first ever virtual assembly. And I think that based on the work that all of the staff have done, it'll be a very good meeting. So thank you. Great. All right.
Jane, this is Peter Heidi again.
Yes, Peter.
I happen to remember the other piece that I had questions about, that the guidelines for sabbatical for our synod. I know there are some synods that have mandatory sabbaticals now, and I'm wondering if there's some way of strengthening the expectations of sabbatical here in our synod.
It's a
I
good
think
question.
I think establishing mandatory sabbaticals would have to be an assembly decision, not something that we would do as we could not do that as staff. It would have to be an assembly decision. I think sabbaticals are incredibly important and helpful for both pastors and congregations. If any congregations are looking to establish their own sabbatical policy, if they want to give me a call, I can steer them to some resources that I know will be helpful.
Great, thanks. All right. With that, I'll bid you all farewell.